The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the quiet farmland where Sarah lived with her young son. To anyone passing by, the place looked worn down. Broken fences, peeling paint on the old farmhouse, and tired soil struggling to hold its crops. Sarah seemed like just another single mother trying to survive. Someone easy to push around, someone who could be ignored. But in the shadows of her silence lived a past no one dared to imagine, a past built on discipline, courage, and the steady hand of a Green Beret sniper. The trouble began when a group of local bullies noticed her land. They weren't interested in farming or work. They wanted to intimidate, to control, to remind others in town that they could take whatever they pleased. One evening, their truck roared down the dirt road and came to a screeching halt outside Sarah's fence. They stepped out laughing, 3 of them, their boots crunching on the gravel as if they already owned the place. They mocked her faded house, sneered at her chickens, and tossed cruel jokes in her direction. Sarah stood firm on the porch, her plaid shirt sleeves rolled up, her hands steady. She met their eyes briefly and spoke in a calm, almost detached voice. "Leave my farm. You don't belong here." The bullies burst into laughter, convinced they had found a woman too weak to fight back. They drove away that night, but Sarah knew they would return. That evening, she sat by the window, her mind drifting back into memories she rarely allowed herself to touch. Years ago, she had crouched in distant deserts, her face streaked with dirt and her rifle steady in her hands, her heartbeat calm as storms raged around her. She had lived through missions where one mistake meant never returning home. Now, those same skills seemed buried under years of motherhood and quiet living. Yet when her son Ethan crept up to her, eyes wide with fear, she felt that strength stirring once more. "Mom," he whispered, "are they coming back?" She held him close, her voice low but certain. "They don't know who they're dealing with, but you do. And you know I'll always keep you safe." The following afternoon, the bullies returned with more arrogance than before. This time they carried spray cans, ropes, and bottles to smash against her barn. They laughed as they rattled her chicken coop, shouted insults, and kicked at the wooden panels of her fence. From the doorway, Sarah stepped out again, but her presence was different. The tired mother was gone. In her place stood the woman who had once survived in deserts, jungles, and war zones. Her voice was sharper, heavier, cutting through their noise. "You have 2 choices," she said firmly. "Leave now, or face consequences you're not prepared for." The men chuckled at first, but then Sarah bent down, picked up a rock from the dirt, and tossed it with such precision that it struck the can straight out of one bully's hand. The clatter echoed across the yard. For a moment, silence fell. The men looked at her differently now, as if realizing she wasn't bluffing. She wasn't nervous, wasn't shaking, wasn't retreating. Instead, she stepped forward slowly, her eyes locked on theirs, her body moving with the certainty of someone who knew exactly how to take control of a battlefield. One of the bullies lunged forward, trying to grab her arm. Within seconds, Sarah twisted, using his own weight to throw him to the ground. Another tried to circle behind her, but she shifted swiftly, blocking his path with a precision strike of her foot that sent him stumbling backward. The leader, suddenly, less confident, hesitated. Sarah didn't raise a weapon. She didn't need to. Every movement of hers carried the unmistakable air of someone trained, disciplined, and unshakable. "You think silence means weakness?" she said coldly, standing tall. "You think because I live quietly, You can take what isn't yours? This farm is my home, my son's safe place, and I will protect it, just as I once protected this country." Her words cut deeper than any weapon. The bullies looked at one another, their bravado evaporating. One by one they backed away, scrambling to their truck, too shaken to continue. Dust rose behind them as they sped away, leaving Sarah and Ethan standing strong in the fading light. Ethan rushed forward, his small arms wrapping around his mother's waist. "I knew you'd protect us," he whispered. Sarah's tough expression softened as she stroked his hair. For the first time in days, peace settled back over the farm. The land was still quiet, still worn, but it was no longer vulnerable. Because behind the tired face of a single mother stood a warrior who had never truly laid down her strength. Sometimes the strongest warriors don't live in battlefields or wear uniforms anymore. Sometimes they live quietly among us, holding their families close, waiting until the moment they must rise again. Sarah's kindness, her patience, her silence, none of it was weakness. It was strength, controlled and enduring. And when tested, she proved that the heart of a mother, combined with the courage of a soldier, could withstand anything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Kind World, where every story reminds us of the hidden courage and kindness that can change everything. The farm looked weary, as though it had seen too many storms and not enough hands to care for it. The fences leaned crooked, boards splintered and weak, and the paint on the old house peeled away in tired flakes. Chickens pecked at the ground, roaming freely as if they, too, had grown used to the neglect. Yet in the middle of this quiet decay stood Sarah. She wasn't glamorous, nor did she try to be. Her jeans were worn, her plaid shirt faded from years of use, but her posture carried a quiet strength, the kind that came not from vanity but from survival. Her eyes, shadowed with exhaustion, still held a depth that few noticed. The low growl of an engine broke the stillness. Dust swirled down the dirt road as a truck pulled up and screeched to a stop in front of her gate. Out jumped 3 men, local, troublemakers known around town for making life miserable for anyone they thought weaker than themselves. They strutted toward the yard, smirks plastered across their faces, eyes gleaming with mischief and malice. One of them kicked at the gravel, chuckling. "This place? Falling apart. Looks like someone ought to put it to better use." Another pointed at the chickens and mocked. "Bet even the birds are laughing at you, lady. What are you holding on to this dump for? Sell it, or better yet, give it to us." They closed in, circling like predators enjoying the game. Their laughter rang sharp in the warm air, full of cruelty. Sarah remained still on the porch, her hands resting loosely at her sides. She didn't rise to their taunts. She didn't even frown. Instead, she lowered her gaze for a moment, steadying herself, and then spoke with quiet calm. "Leave my farm. You don't belong here." Her words were soft, almost too simple, but they carried a weight she didn't show. The men glanced at one another before bursting into laughter, convinced she was nothing more than a tired mother trying to bluff her way out of trouble. To them, she was powerless. To Sarah, they had just made a mistake they would never forget. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the rustle of the wind against the broken shutters and the distant cry of an owl. Sarah sat by the window, her chin resting lightly on her hand, her eyes locked on the stretch of dark farmland outside. The bullies' mocking laughter still echoed in her ears, but her face betrayed nothing. No fear, no anger, only the kind of quiet that comes from holding everything inside. The moonlight painted her features in silver, and as she gazed into the night, the present began to blur. In her mind, she wasn't on her worn-out farm anymore. She was back in the dust and grit of a foreign desert, her uniform heavy with sweat, her rifle pressed firmly against her shoulder. Her body was still, every breath measured, every heartbeat steady as stone. Around her, her unit moved with precision. Men and women bonded not by words, but by the unspoken trust that each of them would give everything to protect the other. She remembered lying prone on a rocky ridge, eye pressed to her scope, waiting for a signal. Hours passed like minutes in that world, and still she never wavered. Her life had been about patience, about choosing the exact moment to act, about protecting lives from the shadows where danger lurked. She had vowed back then, not just as a soldier, but as a human being, that she would always be a protector. Whether on a battlefield or in the quiet corners of life, she would never let those who preyed on the weak have their way. The creak of the old wooden floor pulled her from the memory. She turned to see Ethan, her 10-year-old son, standing in the doorway in his pajamas, his small frame outlined by the dim glow of the hall light. His eyes were wide, worry etched on his young face, worry far too heavy for a child to carry. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling, "are they coming back?" Sarah's expression softened, but only for him. She motioned him closer, and when he reached her side, she pulled him into her lap, wrapping her arms around him with a tenderness that came as naturally as breathing. Yet beneath that embrace was steel, unyielding, unbreakable. She tilted his chin up so he could see her eyes, eyes that no longer carried just fatigue, but a fire he didn't often see. "Listen to me, Ethan," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "They don't know who they're dealing with. They think I'm just a tired woman with a farm." She paused, her gaze hardening as the weight of her past pressed against her. "Words, but you do. You know who I am, and you know I will always keep you safe." Ethan buried his face against her, clinging to the warmth of her strength. Sarah held him tightly, her mind flickering again to the battlefield. The same focus, the same resolve she once carried in combat surged within her again. The Bullies saw a quiet single mother, but Ethan saw his protector, and Sarah knew. When the time came, she would remind those men exactly what silence and strength truly meant. The wind outside howled, rattling the loose panels of the barn. But inside, Sarah's decision was already made. She would not run, she would not break. Her farm was more than land. It was her son's home, their sanctuary. And she would defend it, not with blind rage, but with the calm, unshakable resolve of someone who had faced far worse and never flinched. The morning sun had barely climbed over the horizon when the sound of an engine tore through the quiet once again. Dust billowed down the dirt road as not one but two trucks came rumbling toward the farmhouse. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, her hands still on the dish she had been washing. She didn't need to guess why they were back. Bullies rarely stayed away after being told no. But this time, they weren't just looking to intimidate. The truck screeched to a stop, and half a dozen figures spilled out, laughing and shouting. The three men from before had returned, now with more friends by their side, carrying spray cans, ropes, and bottles of cheap liquor. They looked like they were preparing for a party, but the kind of party that left destruction behind. Their voices carried across the yard as they spread out, their cruel energy infecting the space. One began shaking the fence violently, making the chickens scatter in fright. Another grabbed a loose board from the barn and snapped it in half, tossing. The pieces aside, spray paint hissed across the faded wood, scrawling ugly words and marks. A third picked up handfuls of garbage from the truck bed and threw it toward the porch, laughing when it landed near Sarah's rocking chair. Inside, Ethan cowered behind the table, his eyes wide with fear. But Sarah did not flinch. She set the dish down quietly, dried her hands on a rag, and walked toward the door. The moment she stepped outside, everything shifted. Her movements were measured, steady, almost too calm for the chaos unfolding. Gone was the picture of a weary mother, burdened by too much and supported by too little. In her place stood someone different, someone Ethan had only glimpsed the night before when she promised to keep him safe. Her shoulders straightened, her stride confident, her face unreadable. Each step echoed with the weight of training, of memory, of years lived under the discipline of battle. The men jeered louder as she approached, emboldened by their numbers. One of them pointed and sneered. "Look at her, trying to act tough. What are you gonna do, farm girl? Chase us with a broom?" Sarah stopped in the middle of the yard, her gaze sweeping over them. Her voice, when it came, was sharp and unshakable. "You have two choices. Leave now or face consequences you're not prepared for." The group erupted in laughter. The leader clapped his hands mockingly. "Consequences? Lady, you've got nothing. This place is falling apart just like you." But Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. She bent down slowly, her hand closing around a smooth rock from the ground. For a heartbeat, the men grinned wider, expecting some clumsy throw. Instead, she flicked her wrist with a practiced snap. The rock cut through the air and struck a spray can in one man's hand. The can exploded to the ground, spinning as paint hissed wildly from the puncture. Silence fell instantly. Every head turned toward Sarah. She hadn't shifted her stance. She hadn't even raised her voice. But in that single act, something invisible shifted. The air thickened. The confidence drained from their laughter, and unease crept into their faces. Sarah's eyes were cold steel as she spoke again, her tone lower, deadlier. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. But you just learned one thing. Don't mistake silence for weakness." One of the younger bullies muttered under his breath, suddenly uncertain. The leader tried to laugh it off, but his eyes betrayed him. He had seen the way she moved, the precision in her throw, the absolute calm in her posture. This was no bluff. Sarah stood there like a statue, unwavering, every line of her body, screaming control, confidence, and the unspoken promise that if they took one more step, they would regret it. The farm was no longer just a broken place to bully. It had become a battlefield, and she was already the victor before the fight even began. The yard was still, every sound amplified in the heavy silence after the spray can hit the dirt. The bullies shifted uneasily, but pride made them linger. They thought, perhaps, she was bluffing, that one well-aimed throw was just luck. The leader stepped forward, trying to puff himself up. "Nice trick," he sneered, though his voice wavered. "But there's more of us than you." Sarah didn't move back. She didn't even flinch. Her gaze stayed locked on his, unwavering, unshaken. And then she moved. Not with the clumsy rush of someone panicked, but with the fluid, precise grace of a soldier whose body still remembered what to do. One of the bullies lunged toward her, grabbing for her arm. In an instant, Sarah sidestepped, twisting his wrist until he dropped the rope he was carrying, and with a simple shove sent him sprawling in the dirt. Before he could scramble to his feet, her eyes were already on the next. A second man tried to circle behind her, hoping to catch her off guard. She pivoted sharply, her boot connecting with his shin, forcing him to stumble back, yelping in pain. The others froze. It wasn't wild aggression they saw, it was control. Every movement Sarah made was deliberate, efficient, exact. She didn't waste energy, didn't raise her voice, didn't let chaos break her rhythm. The leader tried to step in, to reassert himself, but by now his swagger had evaporated. Sarah closed the distance between them with slow, steady steps, until he found himself backing into the side of the truck. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. The intensity in her eyes, the calm in her face, the sheer certainty in her body spoke louder than any shove or strike could. Her voice came low, steady as a rifle shot. "This farm is my home, my son's safe place, and I will protect it, just as I once protected this country. Don't mistake silence for weakness." The words struck harder than her hands ever could. The men exchanged glances, their bravado crumbling into fear. No one dared test her again. One by one, they scrambled into the truck, muttering excuses, their laughter gone. The engines roared, dust kicked up, and within moments they were nothing more than a trail disappearing down the road. The farm was quiet again. The chickens slowly returned to their scratching. The broken board lay in the dirt, and the evening breeze whispered through the trees as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. From the doorway, Ethan burst out, his little legs carrying him across the yard. He threw his arms around his mother, holding her as though she were the only safe thing left in the world. Sarah dropped to one knee, wrapping him in a fierce embrace. She let her chin rest against his hair, and only then did her face soften, the soldier's mask giving way to the mother's heart. The battle hadn't been won with violence. No weapons had been fired, no blood had been drawn. It had been won with confidence, discipline, and the quiet power of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Sarah was more than a single mother with a broken farm. She was a protector, a warrior, and above all, the heart of her son's world. The quiet returned, not empty, but whole again. And though the farm still bore its scars, the cracked wood, the fading paint, its spirit had never stood taller. For behind its worn walls lived a mother who carried both kindness and courage, a reminder that strength isn't always loud, but it is always there, waiting when the people we love need it most. Would you like me to now combine all 5 scenes into one flowing 3,000+ word emotional story, with both subscribe prompts, so it's ready as a full YouTube script for the kind world?